I want to just go back to a couple of comments that were made, and I do have a couple of questions for you all. The pricing documents, the Exhibits D, we looked at some of those on the pricings of items, brains, things of this nature. If you're looking at a customer paying, say, $2,000 for a brain, and over the course of the year, that customer is paying $42,000 for the body parts, it is hard to imagine how the procurement business is operating at a loss. And what we are seeking to do is to figure out if there is a violation of the law and if someone is selling these fetal tissue parts for a profit. And that is what we're digging down on, is we're looking at the pricing of fetal tissue represented in those D-series documents. And then it's why we have constructed the chart, the G chart, that shows where there seems to be movement of the money. So you all have heard this debate. You've heard it from both sides. You've heard the questions coming from both sides. And I am going to start, Ms. Clayton, with you and work my way down to Mr. Sakaya. Very quickly, what I would like to hear from you, what documents would you request or subpoena from these procurement organizations in order to find out? We have asked for banking records from the procurement business that has been the point of discussion today, and they have refused to give us those. We thought that would help clear the way, if you will, to figure out what the profiting is. So let's start there very quickly. We've only got 2 minutes and 45 seconds left.
I would start with accepting the invitation from the procurement business. I understand its name is STEM Express, and I'd have them come in, put them under oath, as I understand they've offered to do, and ask them, how did you come up with this charge? Why is it so much more expensive?
That would be an incorrect assumption, but yes, we would like to have
the second thing I would do is ask them in each particular case, what aspect of the actual costs does a particular clinic incur? For example, does the clinic provide space? Does the clinic, as we've seen in your charts, provide the blood draws, which requires a technician, perhaps a nurse, materials? Does the clinic have to do paperwork, and if so, how much? And therefore, how much of the actual reasonable cost is incurred by the clinic itself as opposed to by the procurement business?
Okay.
That's where I would start.
Okay.
Similar. Sterilization of equipment, what's the cost capital of the equipment, the processing, the preservation, or their transportation costs? I wouldn't look at banking records. I'd want to. It's an HR function as well. Staff time for the consent forms that are put together.
All right, Mr. Lennon.
As I said in my opening, you need a forensic. If I was a prosecutor, you have to have a forensic evaluation and accounting of the procurement business, because that's not clear from the records here. So, following the money, you got to have the entire picture.
Mr. Norton?
The first thing I wouldn't do is ask the STEM Express or others, are you innocent or guilty? Every defendant I've ever prosecuted or even represented has claimed innocence. That's just not the case. There is some culpability here. I would do the same thing. I would get forensic accounting. I would get all the financial records. I would get the profit and loss statements, the income and expense statements, and I would get people under oath before a grand jury. Letters are not particularly valuable.
Ms. Foster?
There are two things that I would specifically seek among many different documents. First of all, financial records. That's something that must be brought to light. And second, women of every generation are unique human beings who can speak for themselves, but the baby body parts profiteers have created a market in which their profits rise if they pressure and coerce women into signing donation consent forms. So I would want to find out exactly what their procedures are, what documents, what training they have on how to speak to women and how they get those consent forms signed.
Mr. Sakaya?
I would just echo the comments of the other members on the panel. I would note that in the case that I handled, many of the minors were under. There were reports from people who owned and ran clinics that many minors would be under the age of 14, who often would cry out for their mothers and so forth. They're in no position to give meaningful consent, such as those suggested by the exhibits that were presented here.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield it back.